Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Lewy Body Dementia Association's Lewy Body Dementia University webinar series. My name is Angela Taylor, and I'm the Director of Programs at LBDA, and I'll be your host and moderator for the next hour. Our topic for today is Living Well with LBD. Before I introduce our guest presenter, I do have a few housekeeping announcements for you. If you have any technical problems during today's event, please post them in the chat window so one of our team can respond. And so that everybody's able to hear the presentation, all attendee lines will remain muted throughout the event. Our webinar is being recorded today and will be available on YouTube for on-demand viewing. You'll be receiving a link to the recording by email, and we hope that you'll share it on social media, and you'll also receive access to slides in a PDF format as well. Today's presentation will be followed by a question and answer session, so if you have any questions that come up on today's topic during Dr. Duda's presentation, you can submit them by using the Q&A option that's on your screen. Today's, I'm so sorry. We'll address as many questions as we can throughout the time that we have remaining after the presentation. There are times we can't get to all of them, so we just ask for your understanding. So now on to our presenter. Dr. Duda is the Director of the Parkinson's Disease Research, Education, and Clinical Center for the Philadelphia Veterans Affairs Medical Center. And he's the co-director of the Center for Neurotrauma, Neurodegeneration, and Restoration of the Corporal Michael J. Crescenz VA Medical Center. He's also an associate professor of neurology at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. We're proud to have Dr. Duda as a longstanding member of LBDA's Scientific Advisory Council as well. His research interests include studying the role of Lewy bodies in LBD and Parkinson's disease, and he studied a variety of treatments for people with Parkinson's disease, including deep brain stimulation, transcranial magnetic stimulation, the benefits of plant-based whole food diet, and the use of smell as a biomarker of disease diagnosis and progression. So, Dr. Duda, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to let you take it from here, if you would please, and share your presentation.
Thank you, Angela. Just a quick question. Do you guys see the box that's in the middle of my slide?
I actually do see a box, and it says, please move this away from the screen. Is that something that you have control over? Is that a box you can move?
Not,
okay, now it's gone.
It just seems to go away, and then it comes back up.
Oh, goodness. Cody, if you're there, is that something that you're familiar with?
I am not. I'm not sure what that is. Here, let me, I'm going to switch presenters, and I'm going to present my screen.
That'll be better. That way we'll have no problems. Okay, and then Dr. Duda, all you have to do is say next slide, and Cody will go ahead and advance your slides for you. That ensures that we won't have any technical challenges, and the recording will have a good view as well. So just 1 second, everybody.
Thank you. So while Cody's bringing up the slides, I'll just go ahead and start. And I want to welcome everybody to this webinar and start out by saying that if there are any veterans in attendance, I wanted to thank you for your service and sacrifice. My main position is at the Michael J. Crescenz VA Medical Center in Philadelphia, where I run the Parkinson's Disease Center there. And by all means, if any veterans online have interest in what the VA can offer for people with Parkinson's disease and dementia with Lewy bodies, by all means, reach out to the LBDA and they'll put you in touch with me. And next slide, I guess. As disclosures, I have no financial conflicts of interest for this talk. I do receive research support from various governmental and non-governmental funding agencies, and I am somewhat personally biased by my experience in how a healthy lifestyle can impact well-being. So keep that in mind as we go through the presentation. Next slide. I will be discussing many different lifestyle changes that can improve your brain and overall health. None of you are expected to do all of them. I think few people do all of them, but I like to give everybody what I think is my honest assessment of what a healthy lifestyle includes, even when some of those things are hard to achieve. But what I found in my clinic and at Philadelphia VA, we also have something that we put together called the Brain Wellness Clinic, where we essentially do what we're doing today, talk about lifestyle changes that can improve your brain health and come up with a coordinated plan on how to improve some of those lifestyle choices and then follow them up over time. And what we've noticed is that people who make small choices sequentially end up making big choices over time. And I've seen really remarkable improvements in people's wellness by starting with small changes and continuing to add to them. Certainly, if you're miserable, don't do something. I always say with diet, if you have to eat something to be happy every once in a while, then eat it, and maybe try to eat more healthily the rest of the time. But you know, there's no point in living to be 100 if you're miserable the whole time. Next slide. So another point to note is that much of what I'm going to present is not truly what we would call evidence-based. There have been very few well-done studies on lifestyle modifications in Lewy body dementia. Much of what I have to say is just my opinion based on my understanding of the research and my own experience in clinic. By all means, consult your own physician if you have any concerns about adopting any of the suggestions I make, and even if you're adopting some that you're not sure about, make sure you let your own physician know. Next slide. Oh boy. My slide didn't advance, or my screen didn't advance. Hold on a second. Okay. Something seems to be wrong, but I hope you can see the picture of the boxer, but it seems like I'm driving my own. Okay. I have to go back to the webinar presentation. Okay, there we are. Sorry about that. So in that Brain Wellness Clinic, where I bring in veterans with these disorders, one thing that I've noticed for certain is that there really is a shift in kind of the attitude of approaching these chronic diseases from being somewhat of a victim or a sufferer of a chronic disease to someone who's fighting back. And in my experience, that's very empowering. And I encourage all of you to consider that as you consider the things that I'm going to talk about today. Next slide. So where to start? There are obviously many places on the internet and elsewhere to find information on what entails a healthy lifestyle and what can improve your brain health. Some of them are good and some of them are not so good, I think. I wanted to bring this program up because I think this is one of the better avenues online to find out some good advice about how to improve your brain health, called the Cleveland Clinic Healthy Brain Program, and you can find it at that website. If you just Google Cleveland Clinic and Healthy Brain, it'll come up. It is a free program where you enroll, do a questionnaire about your lifestyle choices, and they kind of give you a rating on 6 different areas of lifestyle that can affect your brain health, and then give you suggestions on how to improve things and check in every once in a while. So it's actually a very useful website. And they do use it to try and recruit for clinical trials and things like that, but you don't have to do any of those when you're participating with it. Next slide. So this is from that website, and these are the 6 areas that they talk about. And today I'm going to focus mostly on exercising and nutrition, but I just want to touch briefly on the other 4 areas. So next slide. Sorry, no, sorry, go back. And you can leave it like this. So the first one I was going to talk about was the one in the top right, the rest well component. So obviously we now know that sleep is very important for Parkinson's disease and dementia with Lewy bodies people, as well as everybody else. It seems to be a time when a lot of repair work is going on in the brain. So getting enough sleep is really crucial. And obviously for some people with these conditions, that can be very troublesome. But working with your physician on pharmacologic and non-pharmacologic interventions to improve your sleep, I think is very important. Meditation is also something that I highly recommend for a lot of my patients, particularly those who have issues with anxiety, stress management, and things like that. And that's a whole nother talk that perhaps we'll do some other time. But so resting includes sleeping, but also relaxing, and there are many different ways to do that, including meditation and prayer and yoga and other things. But so consider adding those into your lifestyle plan as well. The second one I was going to talk about briefly is the bottom left, which they call keeping sharp, and this is essentially mental exercises. This Cleveland Clinic Healthy Brain Initiative was mostly started, I think, for people with Alzheimer's dementia in mind or at risk for that. And so it's been shown that people with that type of dementia who maintain active cognitive activities probably progress slower than people who don't. And your brain reserve, which means how much you use your brain, probably contributes to whether or not and at what age you're going to develop some of these things. If you already have them, it makes sense that using your brain will protect you from further decline. So effortful mental activities like attending webinars like this, and I applaud all of you for doing that today, will probably help you in the long run. Obviously, doing something you love, like playing or hanging out with friends or other things, are all important. So as much as anything else, I encourage people to continue to stay active and do things that really bring you joy. The fourth one, the staying connected one on the bottom, is another recognition that social connection is very important for people with chronic diseases, and Parkinson's disease and dementia with Lewy bodies are no different. The joy and comfort that close personal connections bring is probably just as important as medications in how you feel about your experience of a disease. And if you don't have a lot of close family and friends, there's always opportunities with support groups and volunteering and community activities that I think are very helpful for people with these conditions. The bottom right box, which they call control risk, is more about the other medical conditions that are known to affect your brain health, or activities like smoking and hypertension and diabetes and things like that. So obviously those things are important to take care of as well. The last two components of the Cleveland Clinic Healthy Brain program that we're going to talk about are nutrition and exercise, with a focus mostly on nutrition, which is something near and dear to my heart. And so we'll start there, and let's go to the next slide. So when you think about your nutrition, I want you to ask yourself a couple questions. What do you want the food you put in your body to do? If you just want to be entertained, which is what a lot of our food does these days, it gives us pleasure and sometimes people use it to compensate for other things in their life. But in addition to that and relieving cravings, your food obviously can nourish and sustain you. And I think those are probably even better things to consider when deciding what to eat. Your food can drain your energy or improve your energy. It can harm and wear down your body and brain, or it can heal and strengthen your body and brain. And beyond yourself, obviously, the food choices you make can harm animals or not, and can harm the planet or not. And so those are other things to consider when deciding what to eat. Next slide. So, general rules. I believe that most chronic diseases can be prevented, treated, and often cured by eating nourishing whole plant-based foods. So that means a diet that's mostly plants and as little processing as possible. The phytonutrients, or the nutrients that come from plants that are available in this food, probably have very strong capabilities to treat and prevent these diseases because of their high antioxidant and high anti-inflammatory properties. These are topics that we don't have much time to talk about, unfortunately, but are two components of what we think is causing most of these diseases. So in order to do that, people recommend that you eat a whole unprocessed foods, including fruits, vegetables, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, beans, legumes, whole grains, teas, and spices. Basically any plant food you can think of, and as little processing as possible. And the more variety and color, the better. Next slide. So if you look at these compounds, to me, they look like medications. If you drew the chemical structure of a lot of the medications we take, they look very similar. But these are all compounds that are available in plant foods, and what we call them phytochemicals. Phyto from plants, and chemicals, and they're just as much medications as other things. And the combination, there's probably 10,000 of these compounds that we get in a regular diet, and how they interact is probably much greater than getting one or two of these compounds in the form of medications. And I don't believe that there's any single silver bullet out there that's going to slow or cure these diseases. It's certainly not anytime soon. But I think the combination of all of these chemicals can almost certainly slow the progression or prevent these diseases. Next slide. So how do we do this? In general, we eat a diet that's consistent with a Mediterranean diet. Many of you have heard that term, or a MIND diet, or a whole foods plant-based diet. And what does that comprise? We'll delve into in the next couple slides. Next slide. So, eating healthy greens. There are few plant products that have more phytonutrients, certainly by weight, than healthy greens. And you can eat just about any kind you like, and they're all listed here. And then cruciferous vegetables as well, including broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, Brussels sprouts, things like that. And allium vegetables, which are onions, shallots, garlic, are all healthy choices. A lot of these vegetables, especially the last two groups, are improved if you cut them up into smaller pieces, because there are compounds formed when they're broken down like that or chewed up than if you cook them and then chew them up, because those compounds won't be formed and they're not heat stable. So if you cut them up first and then steam them or microwave them, you'll get even more phytonutrients from them. Next slide. So another big component of a Mediterranean diet is legumes. And legumes include beans, chickpeas, lentils, and split peas. And there's obviously many different kinds of beans out there, with kidney beans, black beans, garbanzo beans, navy beans, fava beans. Almost any bean you can think of are healthy. And peanuts are actually more like a bean than a nut. And so most of you should be able to find some that you like. And obviously there are a lot of processed bean products out there now, especially soy products, including tofu, miso, edamame, soybeans, tempeh, etc. Some of these are more or less processed, and there are other bean-based, plant-based foods that have more processing, but are perhaps a good segue from a standard American diet to a more plant-based diet. Next slide. Nuts are another important component of a healthy plant-based diet. They're high in protein and phytonutrients, and if you're going to pick one thing to change in your diet, I always recommend to add a tablespoon or so of ground flax seeds a day to your diet. The nutrients found in flax seeds are really remarkable, with the lignans and omega-3 fatty acids and fiber, and it's relatively cheap and it doesn't taste like much, so you can put it in many different foods and hardly even notice it's there. Next slide. Fruits and berries are another important component. We've all heard about blueberries and how important they are for brain health, but almost any fruits and berries are healthy. You know, the more color they have, perhaps the better. That's why small, dark berries are perhaps best, but all of these fruits and vegetables have lots of fiber, which is important, and other phytonutrients that are all part of a healthy diet. Next slide. So you want to eat the rainbow. So, you know, a lot of the vegetables we have come in many different colors, and those colors are actually the compounds that are probably helping maintain your health, because the compounds that are making a tomato red or a carrot orange or a pea green are the ones that can give you a lot of the health benefits. So mixing them on a daily basis, so not eating the same healthy fruits and vegetables every day, but mixing them up every day and mixing them together is probably even better than it's even better than eating the same one all the time. Next slide. So many phytonutrients in plants are actually fat soluble. So if you eat them without any fat in the meal, they won't get absorbed in your gut as well. So we often recommend that you include healthy sources of fat in your diet, and sometimes that can be a dressing. You know, extra virgin olive oil and some other oils can be good choices, but there's other whole food choices like almonds and flax seeds and walnuts and cashews and sesame seeds. They are all high in fat and have all the other phytonutrients as well. When you take an olive and you take out the oil, well, you're taking out some of the phytonutrients. All the ones that are water soluble, you're getting rid of. So you're losing some of the nutritional benefits from an olive by making oil out of it. As far as oils go, it's probably one of the healthier ones, but eating the whole olive may even be healthier. Next slide. Avocados are also a great source of healthy fats. Some people like to say that every time you drink water, which is a great idea, you know, every time you ask yourself whether or not you should eat or drink something, you should ask yourself compared to what. So there's very few things that are completely healthy or completely unhealthy. You know, water is better for you than drinking soda or dairy products or other things, but it may not be as healthy as drinking tea, because every time you drink plain water, you're missing out a chance to bathe your body in more phytonutrients in the form of a tea. And you can take any kind of tea you like, you know, green, white tea, black tea, but then herbal teas like rooibos or hibiscus or rosehip, that don't have caffeine or anything you like, and you don't even need to steep it in boiling water. Most of these things you can just put in cold water and come back a couple hours later or the next day and you've got tea. And it's a healthier choice than certainly soda or clear fruit juice and other things. Coffee is really just seed soup, so it's for the most part a healthy choice. The only problem is that too many of us like to load it up with empty calories in the form of sugar and dairy in the form of cream, and that makes it less healthy. But coffee itself is a very healthy choice. Next slide. So I mentioned that leafy greens are high phytonutrient density per weight, but the highest ones we have are spices, and nearly any spice you can think of is a healthy choice because it's loaded with with antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds. So whichever ones you like and that you'll eat more of, eat more of them. I mean, pepper is a great choice. We used to think that pepper just went through you, but now we know that there are many chemicals in pepper that are actually good for you. There are a lot of different cultures that use a combination of spices to come up with blends, and it's fun experimenting with those. And you can put spices on just about any meal you can think of to make them a healthier choice. So salads, oatmeal, chili, whatever you like, you can always add more spices and make it more healthy. Next slide. So we talked about fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds, but mushrooms are a whole nother category of organism, and they're more primitive, but they also have nutrients that you can't get elsewhere. So mushrooms are a healthy choice. For the most part, you want to eat mushrooms cooked, because some mushrooms uncooked have chemicals that are probably make them less healthy than eating them cooked. But almost any kind of mushroom you can think of are good, healthy choices. Obviously, going out in the woods and picking your own is not a good idea, because there are poisonous varieties. But any kind of commercial mushroom you can find is a good, healthy choice. Next slide. Some people ask me, what about fish? And I think it's still debatable about whether or not including fish in your diet in the long term is a healthy choice or not. There are obviously some things in fish that are difficult to get other ways, like omega-3 fatty acids. But for the most part, everything you can get in fish, you can get from a whole food plant-based diet, including the protein and fatty acids. But I think if you want to include fish, then it's reasonable to consider why you're eating them. And like I said, for the most part, we eat them for omega-3 fatty acids. And if you want to do that, then you want to eat Pacific Coast wild-caught salmon, which is high in omega-3s, and then small fishes like anchovies, sardines, mackerel. Those fish are also lower down on the food chain, so they've had less time to bioaccumulate the toxins that are unfortunately all throughout our waterways that you get in larger predator fish. So a better choice. Some people would prefer just to take an omega-3 fatty acid supplement. Most of them are derived from fish, which can be fine, but it's very difficult, if not impossible, to remove all of the pesticides and other toxic chemicals that come in our fish from fish oils. So another choice is an algae-derived omega-3 fat supplement. Fish don't make omega-3 fatty acids; they just get them from algae and bioaccumulate them. So you're getting them from the source if you eat an omega-3 fatty acid from algae. Next slide. Grains are obviously a big part of our Western diet. We eat a lot of processed grains, mostly wheat and rice. When we take a processed grain, it was a good idea 100 years ago to process your grains because it made them much more shelf stable. But these days, when we don't have to worry so much about that, it's a better idea to eat whole grains. And there are all kinds of whole grains readily available in any supermarket now, including oatmeal, brown rice, quinoa, barley, farro, which is then spelt, which are kind of varieties of wheat, bulgur wheat, and then there are more processed forms like whole wheat bread, whole wheat pasta, etc. When you're reading the labels, you want to make sure that it says 100% whole grain or something like that, because if it says made with whole grains, well, there could be 1% of the grains in that product are whole grains, and that doesn't do you much good. So you really have to become more of a label reader when you're looking at processed grain products. But eating more and more of the whole grain varieties and less of the more processed ones is a good part of a healthy diet. Next slide. So I usually get a kick out of this when I do this talk live. Unfortunately, I can't hear you guys. Hopefully, I got some chuckles out of you. But the idea is to eat enough fiber in your diet so that you poop more. Probably one of the main reasons people in middle age have constipation is they don't eat enough dietary fiber. And people always ask on a plant-based diet, where do you get your protein? Well, it's been very clearly shown that protein starvation on a whole food plant-based diet is very, very hard to do. As long as you eat a variety of different plant foods, you're going to almost certainly get enough protein. But 93% of Americans don't get enough dietary fiber. And so when people ask me that, I say, well, where are you getting your fiber? And fiber only comes in plant foods, just like cholesterol only comes in animal products. Fiber only comes in plant foods. So eating enough high fiber sources, and there are calculations about how many grams of fiber you should eat as a man or woman at a certain age. But in general, if you're eating mostly plants, you're going to get enough fiber. And sure enough, you eat mostly plants, you're going to have more bowel movements too, because it's going to improve the health of the bacteria in your gut and have you having more frequent bowel movements. Next slide. If you want to help out the bacteria in your gut, another way to consider is eating probiotic foods, which include naturally fermented products that have not been pasteurized, because if you pasteurize them, you kill all the good bacteria. But things like sauerkraut, kimchi, pickles, kombucha, etc., are things you consider. There are obviously a whole huge industry of probiotics you can buy in pill form. Frankly, I'm not convinced of the health benefits of many of them, and you obviously don't know exactly what you're getting a lot of the time. But there have been 1 or 2 studies that suggest some benefit for people with chronic diseases, so it's worth considering. The other idea is to take prebiotics, which are what we've been talking about so far, all the plant-based sources of fiber that make it down into your colon and feed the healthy bacteria in your colon are a great choice as well. Next slide. What about organics? So people always ask me this, and frankly, the data is a little unclear. If you look at a lot of the reports out of the major agricultural industries, they'll say, well, there's no evidence that organic produce is healthier than normal produce. But they in general only look at the macronutrients like fat and protein and carbohydrates. They're not looking at the 10,000 phytonutrients that you get in a whole food plant-based diet. And if you look at those, there is some data to suggest that organic produce has higher levels of those, because those compounds are formed by those plants to protect themselves from pests and diseases. And if they are protected from those things artificially by pesticides, by the farmer, well, then they won't spend the energy to make those compounds. But if they're grown organically, they're more likely to do so. The caveat being that, especially with modern industrial organic production, there are many chemicals that are allowed in organic produce, but they're naturally based chemicals. So just because it's organic doesn't mean they didn't use any pesticides or herbicides in the growth of that product. It just means that they didn't use any artificial ones. So it makes it kind of complicated. And one thing that I point people to is the Environmental Working Group, which has come up with a list of what they consider to be foods that you should consider eating organics, and foods that you should call the dirty dozen. There's a dozen of those foods. And there's the clean 15, which are foods that they say it doesn't matter if you eat them organic or not. But they actually rank about 51 different foods. So next slide, here's the whole list. And you can use this for yourself to consider. You take it to the grocery store, and if you're thinking about buying something in the red column, in the red numbers, the first 12, well, think hard about buying those in organic form, because those are the ones that either use a lot of pesticides in their production or have a lot of pesticides in the part of the food that you eat. So most of the fruits we eat and greens and berries and things fall in that category. In the green category are the things that either have a big shell that we don't eat, like a cantaloupe or grapefruit, or they just don't use much pesticide in the production, like like asparagus or other things. So if you want to be wise about whether or not to pick organics, I think this is a good place to start. Next slide. There are some side effects to adopting a whole food plant-based diet. At first, because you're changing the bacteria in your gut, and you can change it within a couple weeks, it's pretty clear. You may experience some GI discomfort or flatulence that usually resolves in a few days or weeks. You will, like I said, normally experience an increase in the number of bowel movements you have, so less constipation. There are rare medication interactions. You know, the phytonutrients we get in plants are just like medicine. So sometimes you get interaction between the medicine in plants and the medicine you're taking. So particularly if you're thinking about eating a lot of grapefruit or leafy greens and you're on blood thinners, then discuss that with your physician and make them aware before doing so. And don't forget, there are a lot of other side effects to eating a whole food plant-based diet, including less risk of heart disease, diabetes, stroke, cancer, depression, dementia, insomnia, hypertension, etc. Next slide. I obviously don't know everything, and I encourage all of my patients to educate themselves and teach me as well. And here's some good resources for you to start with. The movie on the left, Forks Over Knives. There's now a number of good movies out there, but this is one of the first that really shows how the standard American diet is really affecting our health. And then there's 3 books here. And Dr. Michael Greger, who wrote How Not to Die, I think is one of the best resources on the internet. His website is called nutritionfacts.org, where he presents the latest research on how healthy diets can prevent and treat chronic diseases. And I encourage you to look at the book and look at the website. And then there's some other cookbooks there as well. Next slide. So we're back to one more click. We're back to the final component of the Cleveland Clinic Healthy Brain program, which is getting moving. Next slide. And this is a cute cartoon that says, this is the exercise pill for Parkinson's disease. To treat your Parkinson's disease, all you have to do is take this amazing pill every day, taking it out for a jog, taking it to the gym, taking it out for a bike ride, etc. So, you know, we all know that exercise is healthy. It's getting to do it, which is the tricky part. Next slide. But for chronic diseases, especially chronic diseases of the brain, it's not clear that any one is definitely better than any other. So in general, if you want a healthy exercise plan, you want to include facets of aerobic exercise, strength training, flexibility, and balance training. You know, there's examples here for each one of those. Some people really enjoy rock steady boxing or dance programs, and there have been studies shown that these kinds of activities clearly help people, at least with Parkinson's disease. Again, with conventional Lewy bodies, there's less research done to date. But the designing a really healthy exercise program is beyond the scope of this talk for time reasons, but I encourage everybody to go to a trainer who's well versed in putting together exercise programs for older people or people with chronic diseases, and get active and get busy. And there's probably nothing that your doctor can do in the long that will help you as much in the long run as getting you exercising. So I highly encourage everyone to do that. And obviously, people are in different stages of their illness. Next slide. So we've kind of we have to take that into consideration. For someone who is in a wheelchair, they're not going to get 30 minutes of aerobic exercise a day for the most part. But these are the recommendations of the American Heart Association, and in general, they say that we should get at least 30 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic exercise 5 days a week for a total of 150 minutes. If you're able to do more vigorous exercise, you don't have to do as much. And they recommend that most people do moderate to high intensity strength training exercises as well. So, you know, these are pretty rigorous guidelines, and frankly, we've done studies and shown that very few people are able to do that, including people with Parkinson's disease. But they are targets, especially for people early in the course of the illness who want to fight back as much as possible. Next slide. But if you're further along in the illness, then you obviously have to take your limitations into consideration. And my colleague, Dr. Jim Morley, has been working on this, kind of working on catered exercise prescriptions for people at different stages of these chronic illnesses. And this is for Parkinson's disease in particular. And the H and Y's you see are something called Honing Yar. It's a staging system, but basically you can just look at the pictures above. And the first one is a kind of normal functioning person. The second one is a mildly impaired person. The third one is someone who's still walking around independently but has more trouble. The fourth one is someone who needs assistive devices to walk around, and the last one is someone who's completely wheelchair or bedbound. And based on the stage of your own illness, you can decide what kinds of things might be most appropriate for you or your loved one. Next slide. So finally, the most important tips I can have, and I'm going to leave a lot of time for questions and answers, but relax. We're supposed to, making ourselves healthier is supposed to be fun, and you will see that if you take control of your wellness in any of these ways we've talked about, you will feel better about yourself, and it helps you have a completely different outlook on life and on your condition. And be kind to yourself. Nobody does all this stuff, and too many people get into this and they start judging themselves for not doing enough. But that doesn't do you any good either. Applaud yourself for the things you can do and just keep working, taking it one step at a time and not giving up. Next slide. So now we'll open it up to questions and answers, and I'll ask Cody to do that for us.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Duda. We really appreciate the presentation. I now have a whole list of to-dos for my diet and one great big to-do for my exercise program. So a lot of learning here for all of us today. I'd like to share a couple of questions that we've received during your presentation, and I actually have a host of my own questions. So we'll start with those questions that came in during your presentation. So we've got a question from Don in Texas. He would like to know, is there any benefit from getting spices like turmeric in a pill form versus the actual spice itself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a little tough to say with certainty, but in general, as I said, I think my philosophy is that a whole foods plant-based approach is the healthiest. The compound that most people have been excited about in turmeric is something called curcumin. But if you actually look at the literature, it's not clear that curcumin is what's giving most people the benefit they get from turmeric. So I think using whole turmeric is better than derivatives of it. And it's much cheaper to get a jar of turmeric and add it to foods than to take the pills. The nice thing about the pills is that they often come with other things like piperidine, which is a compound from pepper that actually makes the absorption of some of the curcuminoids about 100-fold better. So if you're going to use pure turmeric, then add some ground pepper to it as well. But I frankly do both. Sometimes I add turmeric to a lot of my foods, but I also take turmeric capsules that I make up myself with some pepper in them. So I think either one is reasonable, and it's not clear to me that one is definitely better than the other.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question. Could you please explain why you suggest less dairy products or milk? I thought healthy people should get 3 cups a day, and that comes from an anonymous viewer.
Sure. Great question. There is an abundance of literature that suggests that mammals are not intended to drink the milk of, to drink animal milk past the age of weaning, especially not from another species. There are many compounds in dairy products that that can be detrimental to your health. Obviously, we all know about lactose intolerance, but there are many other things in milk and dairy products that are probably not so good for you either. There's no evidence that I'm aware of in the literature that wasn't supported by the meat or dairy industry to suggest that adding dairy products to a whole food plant-based diet will make it healthier. Obviously, again, you have to say compared to what? Is milk better than having a Coca-Cola? Yeah, probably, but it's certainly not better than having teas or water or some fruit juices. So there is very good evidence that the more milk products you consume, the more likely you are to get Parkinson's disease. It's not a huge risk, but it's a pretty clear risk, probably the strongest risk factor after the protection we get from smoking. I think there's ample reason to believe that there are better choices to drink than milk. There are better sources of protein than milk, and there are better sources of calcium than milk. So there's nothing in milk that you can't get from other sources. And unfortunately, the meat and dairy industry sometimes make that argument very compelling that milk is part of a healthy diet. But I think there's more and more compelling evidence that may not be the case.
All right, thank you. Another question. There was recently some news in the media about potential protection benefits from coffee, protection against Parkinson's. I really liked your description that it's seed soup, and I'll have to consider that when I pour my next cup. But what do we know about coffee and any benefits that it can provide?
So it is true. There have been several studies that look epidemiologically at consumption of different foods, and those who drink coffee are less likely to get Parkinson's disease. It's a reasonable risk reduction. It's interesting that people who smoke are also less likely to get Parkinson's disease, which doesn't mean I'm going to suggest anybody start smoking to prevent Parkinson's disease. But what is a cigarette, after all? It's rolled up leafy green vegetables, and those leafy greens are tobacco, and tobacco is in the same family as some other vegetables like red peppers and eggplant and other things called Solanaceae. And we think that the protective compound in tobacco is actually nicotine, and you can actually get low levels of nicotine from those other vegetables as well, without all of the carcinogens and other things that you get in smoking. But yeah, at one point we actually thought that coffee might actually even treat the symptoms. There was one study that suggested that. There was a larger study that drew some question in that. So it probably doesn't help the motor symptoms. It clearly does help the fatigue and sleepiness that a lot of people experience in Parkinson's disease, and should definitely be tried before other more aggressive therapies for daytime sleepiness. But coffee, like I said, it's a bean, and it is a healthy component of a healthy diet.
Okay, wonderful. All right, I'm going to shift a little bit and move to the exercise thing. We've got a couple questions that have come in there. And both of them from individuals whose mother have LBD, which is really interesting. And they're both about slowing the disease progression or trying to prevent it and reduce their own risk of it. So one of them is a prevention question. What do we know about the role of exercise and disease prevention? And are there special exercises? This particular individual, this is from Lori, is wondering if the use of trampoline in exercise routines for balance and aerobics, has any potential benefits.
So I'm not aware of any research on trampolines as a therapy for balance problems. I do in the clinic recommend that all of my patients, particularly early patients who don't have any balance problems, do include balance exercises in their exercise routine to kind of over strengthen or build up some functional reserves so that it hopefully takes longer for their balance issues to develop. Obviously, for someone who already has balance problems, that kind of adding that to your exercise routine should be done under the supervision of a trained professional, because you don't want to fall and hurt yourself. But I think that there are many different lines of evidence that suggest that exercise it can slow the progression of these diseases and probably prevent them as well. Some of them are animal models, but then there's also some epidemiological work that suggests that the people who exercise are less likely to get chronic diseases of many kinds, including those affecting the brain. You know, I don't. Right now, I don't have the data in front of me to say, you know, what percentile chance less you have of getting one of these diseases if you exercise regularly. But obviously, part of it is probably that you're also strengthening your heart and lungs and improving the blood flow to your brain. So there are many different ways that exercise can benefit people who have these diseases, or people who perhaps have a family history of them and are trying to prevent them in themselves. So I think it's almost indisputable that that's a good idea for those two groups of people.
Wonderful. The next question is, I'm an occupational therapist and I'm interested in outcomes with the progression of Lewy body disease. What are, you know, can you provide anything that families can do or that professionals can do to help slow down the progression? Her mom has Lewy body disease. So
anything beyond what we've talked about, you mean as far as occupational therapy?
I think anything really, you know, as an adult child of a parent with LBD, you know, really, you know, are there, you know, you indicated, for example, like early exercise early in the disease can help preserve things like balance, and that's ultimately the goal. Same thing with staying socially and cognitively engaged. You know, you know, are there other things that families should be considering that may also help keep the person either functioning at their best or slowing down the progression?
So I think essentially everything that they cover on the Cleveland Clinic Healthy Brain Program is worth considering. You know, unfortunately, we don't have too many well-done longitudinal studies looking at lifestyle modifications in Lewy body dementia. So to say categorically that any one thing is going to slow down the disease progression in a given person is impossible to do, I think. But all of these things, scientifically, there's reason to believe that they should have that capacity. And for many of them, especially exercise, there's good scientific evidence to support from animal models, and now more so, at least in Parkinson's disease, in human studies as well. There are many different researchers studying different aspects. You know, how vigorous does the exercise have to be? How often do you have to do it? Is there one type of exercise that's better than others? At this point, I think it's a little premature to say that we know the answers to those questions. And for the most part, whatever exercise you can get your loved one to do more often is probably a good choice. I think, like I said, keeping in mind that you'd like it to be a combination of those four components: aerobics, strength training, flexibility, and balance training. But beyond that, you know, pick whichever ones your loved one is capable and willing to do, and do those.
All right, thank you. Here's a question from one of our Facebook viewers. And I think this is a common issue, and which is why I'm bringing it up. You know, some of us have parents who are willing to do anything that is potentially beneficial for them when they're living with a disease like LBD. Others have relatives that are not really willing to take the extra step. And from a family perspective, you know, how much pressure should we put on our loved ones to take some of these actions to maximize their wellness if they're not willing? You know, how do you guide your patients, especially their caregivers?
That's a great question. In my clinic, I take that into consideration when I'm making recommendations, and even when I'm suggesting someone attend the brain wellness clinic or not. I mean, obviously you can lead a horse to the trough, but you can't make them drink. And I have many patients who are just not interested in doing any of these things. And I think at this point it would be incorrect to say that they are clearly you know, decreasing their lifespan or changing their quality of life. If it's someone who hates to eat healthy and hates to exercise, and you force them to do those things, well, then their quality of life is going to drop probably just from doing those. So it's a tricky question. I think it has to be considered on an individual basis. I don't think that if it was my loved one and I was in that situation, I don't think I would push too hard to get them to do these things. I think obviously everyone should be in charge of their own lifestyle, and if they choose to do things that you know are outside of what we're recommending here, well, that's their choice. I don't think, you know, this is mostly for people who, you know, the other ones who want to do everything they can and want to see the benefits from kind of taking control and fighting back, even without the clear evidence that it's definitely going to extend their lifespan or improve their quality of life.
All right, thank you. That's very, very helpful. Next question comes from another anonymous attendee, and they would like to know if someone is having balance problems and other characteristics of LBD, but it's inconsistent. You know, can this be something that needs to be pursued by a doctor for evaluation, or you know, what if they're not willing to attend, you know, see the doctor about things that may be LBD related? And specifically, I think their focus is on the balance problems and what can they do at home with that loved one, even if they're not seeing a doctor, to improve their balance?
So balance is obviously a very important component of many of these diseases. Once you start having problems with balance and begin falling, it really changes everything. And unfortunately, many of our medical interventions do not help that much for balance issues. Physical therapy is almost certainly beneficial for most people with balance problems. And I think, you know, doing balance exercises probably helps, although we don't, and there hasn't been a study that clearly proves that. And there are these other, if you look on the market now, there are other devices that are being sold to help with balance that are potentially useful. One of them is called Balance Wear. Essentially, they are jackets that are worn under your clothes that are fitted with small weights that help to readjust your postural feedbacks to somehow help your balance. There have been some very few studies to clearly prove that they work in these conditions. We have tried them in some of our patients with variable response. Some people think that it helps their balance and some people don't. But it's something to consider. But balance is a very difficult problem, and that's why I highly encourage people who don't have balance problems to include balance exercises in their daily fitness routine to try and prevent that onset.
All right, thank you. We are down to about 1 minute. I'm going to ask if we can just close with one more quick question. We've got a couple of questions that have come in about either advanced stage disease with, you know, significant motor symptoms, and another individual was very contracted. The mother's very contracted. You know, what from a vantage point of diet or exercise or physical therapy, you know, what are there anything that is there anything they can do to help these people who are well advanced in the disorder?
That's a good question. There's no evidence that I'm aware of that people with advanced degenerative conditions like Lewy body dementia or others will benefit much from these types of lifestyle changes. I think, you know, some of the other ones that we mentioned at the beginning, including improving social connections and getting appropriate rest and things like that, are probably the most likely to be beneficial. As I said, I think, you know, almost anybody can do some forms of exercise. Whether or not that's clearly going to change their disease course or anything is unknown. I think, like I said, one of the main benefits is just the realization that you're doing what you can, and that fighting back against an illness like this gives you an empowerment that changes your attitude. So if you have somebody who's in an advanced condition but still wants to do something, then by all means have them do what they can and you know, see what benefit they get.
Great, great, wonderful. Well, again, Dr. Duda, let me thank you again so much for sharing your expertise today, your time with us, and to all the attendees, those who are live on the webinar and those who are watching us through Facebook, thank you all for spending your afternoon with us. As a reminder, all of our webinars are recorded and posted on our YouTube page, so please watch for an email or a link on our in our Facebook for how you can watch the webinar or share it with other people. About our newest initiative, our Research Centers of Excellence program, we encourage you to go to our website, lbda.org, and then put in /RCOE for Research Center of Excellence. It's a network of 25 sites across the country where you can have access to expert clinical care, opportunities to participate in research, and find support and education. Last of all, I just want to remind you that programs like this are made possible through many individual donations. This was made possible, today's event, by donors, many of whom have family members living with LBD. So if you're able and you'd like to, we encourage you to make a gift. You can visit our website or call our office. Hopefully, this will also help you at the end of your giving time, tax benefits, etc. But we also want to remind or offer you guys our very, very best wishes for a happy holiday season and a happy and healthy new year. Thank you for attending our event today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.